One thing the PlayStation 3 has always been infamous for is the sheer complexity of its architecture. The cell processor used in the console was really advanced for the time. I mean, the US Air Force was using its PS3s to build a supercomputer, which is mind-blowing to say the least, and a crazy thing to think about actually. Unfortunately, this complexity came at a cost. Due to its complex hardware, developing games for the PS3 proved to be particularly difficult, with most AAA titles running and looking much better on the Xbox 360. And because the developers couldn't properly utilize the console's potentials, this also brought one very unintended consequence. You see, because of how complex the PS3's architecture was, emulating it out turned to be quite a challenge. Despite being released in 2006, it wouldn't be until 2014 when RPCS3, a PlayStation 3 emulator, started running some simple commercial games. As I'm sure you already know, RPCS3 has improved tremendously over the years. However, it still requires a very powerful PC, mainly the CPU, in order to get a playable performance in a lot of titles. This exact reason is why PS3 emulation was always considered out of the picture when it came to mobile devices, and why I and many others thought we wouldn't see RPCS3 running on Android possibly ever. Well, that was until March of this year when, seemingly out of nowhere, RPCS3 Android was released. Developed by one of the core RPCS3 devs, for the first time we actually have a real and working PS3 emulator which you can run on a phone, and it's kinda insane. I mean, as fascinating as it is, one thing I find even more insane is just how little coverage it got. I mean, this is a pretty big milestone for emulation in general, and I know a lot of people have been wanting to run PS3 games on their phones, so I really don't know why this went fairly under the radar. Before getting started, I quickly want to say that if you're a fan of this type of content, subscribe to my channel as I plan to make a whole lot more videos like this one. Setting the emulator up was pretty confusing actually, and not because the installation process is difficult. No, in fact it's as simple as downloading a .apk file and installing it. But rather because of a few quite odd choices the developers made. You see, despite the name, developers strictly forbid talking about RPCS3 Android on their Discord server, and never mention it, well, anywhere. However, they do have a separate Discord server for called RPCS3. I think I immediately noticed while browsing this Discord server is that RPCS3 Android was discontinued and instead merged with a different project called, well, RPCS3. Now what is RPCS3, you may ask? Well, RPCS3 is a work-in-progress PS4 and PS5 emulator developed for Linux. Now what does this have to do with PS3 and Android, you may also think to yourself? And the answer is, I have absolutely no clue. These two emulators, despite having the same name and sharing the same GitHub page, have nothing in common at all, and I really have no idea why they weren't just kept separate. But what makes this even more ridiculous is that, according to the people in their Discord server, RPCS3 is far worse than the old and discontinued RPCS3 Android, and the best build to use is version 5.2, which is far from the newest actually. Well, after using my CSI Miami skills to track down the most stable version of the emulator, I installed it, and now we finally get to run some games. But before that, I need to talk about the device I'm using to run these games. I have a Samsung Galaxy S25, which uses the Snapdragon 8 Elite chipset, which is one of the strongest Android chipsets on the market as of right now. But this still isn't exactly a gaming phone, and something like a Red Magic 10 Pro will perform much better. You're also probably curious about the minimum requirements for this emulator, and the truth is that, well, I don't know. Given how little information there is regarding the emulator, it's no surprise that finding the actual requirements for it is difficult. All in all, if you have a modern, mid-range or flagship phone, you probably can get games to at least boot on the emulator. Speaking of games, let's see how they run and find out if any are actually playable. The first game I decided to try out is an underrated game called Resogun. If you haven't played it, it's a fun 2D shooter created by Housemarque, the company behind more popular games such as Returnal. Now, despite it being a 2D title, I really didn't expect it to perform as well as it did. After compiling all the shaders, the game ran at a practically locked 30 FPS, even with a lot of enemies on screen. I had a really good time playing to the arcade mode, even on a touchscreen. Oh yeah, speaking of which, I'm sorry that all the footage you're seeing in this video has the touchscreen overlay on top of it. As it turns out, RPCS3 Android does not have control support at all. So I was stuck playing on the touchscreen, which is honestly not an amazing experience, and I hope the emulator gets support for real controls in the future. That is, if the project continues getting updated anyways. Before moving on to the next game, there is one very important aspect that you need to consider before emulating PS3 games. That is the phone's temperature. It will come as no surprise that doing something as intensive as emulating one of the most complex gaming systems on a pocket-sized device will make it heat up a lot. This again heavily depends on your device, but My S25 for example would get really hot, especially during the PPU module pre-compilation. This would also obviously make the battery drain much quicker than usual, as well a lot of horsepower was needed to run this. If you want a potential solution for this problem, you could get one of those phone coolers that go on the back of your device, but I really doubt most people want to carry this around. I mean, at this point I'd just rather get an actual portable gaming device. But if you do decide you really want to play games on your phones like this, here's some advice as to not melt your phone. Firstly, do not launch games immediately after they precompile the PPU modules. Let your phone cool off a bit and then come back. Secondly, do not play for more than 30 minutes at a time. And lastly, if you have a phone case, I recommend taking it off as it also makes heat dissipate more slowly than without it. Anyways, back to the games. The next title I decided to test out was a bit of a joke, but I was really curious to see how GTA San Andreas would run on this emulator. If you don't already know, the PS3 version of San Andreas is actually just a mobile port of SA. However, Rockstar decided to port it to the 7th generation consoles for some reason. As expected, it also runs at a steady 30 FPS and looks and plays exactly like the mobile port. Except the fact that it really burns my head trying to play it. While I can consider this game playable, there is really no reason you'd ever want to play this. Trust me on this one. Okay, so for the next game I decided to go with something much more intensive, and that game is Skate. I'm trying out the original Skate, which was released in 2007, and despite its age, this is still a very intensive game to emulate. At first, it started off relatively promising, but things went downhill as soon as I actually got in game. While I could get some semblance of a playable framerate depending on how I was looking, it would stutter and freeze randomly and oftentimes would just drop frames a lot, probably due to the physics engine struggling to keep up with the fact that it's being played on a Smaznack smartphone. While it's neat that the game was able to be run on the emulator at all, and I could actually pull off a few tricks, calling it playable would be a huge stretch to say the least. So when I was thinking about games that could be easy to run on the emulator, a thing that came to mind immediately were sports titles. They are often quite easy to run and not really intensive, and I figured why not try one out. I decided to try out the demo for FIFA 08, but unfortunately it would crash immediately after getting to the menu, so that was out of the picture. Since I couldn't run that, I decided to try out the demo for Pro Evolution Soccer 09, which actually worked, and believe it or not, after the shaders compiled I was getting a steady 60 FPS, which is definitely not something I expected to see out of this experiment. Unfortunately, this is where you start to see a limitation of the emulator. By default, the game has an issue where, and I'm sorry, but I mean this in the most non-racist way possible, all characters are pitch black. Now, this actually also happens on the PC version of the emulator, and it does have a fix. By enabling right color buffer setting on RPCS3, the players actually render properly. Unfortunately, enabling this setting on the Android version caused it to crash before reaching the match itself, and I could not get it to work. The same thing also happened with the Uncharted 1 demo, which has an issue of it being extremely blurry without this setting, but also crashes if I enable that setting. Oddly enough, as I learned later on in the video, this is actually not the case for all games. Another thing you may have noticed by now is that most of the games I play here are demos and not full games, and there is actually a very simple explanation for that. The first advantage is that demos are, well, free, and the second, more important one is that demos are also obviously way smaller in file size compared to the full games, which, given my limited storage, is a lifesaver, and is very useful for testing and recording a lot of games at once. The next game I decided to try was something much more intensive than all the previous ones, and that is the demo to Gran Turismo 5 Prologue. And despite it being in Japanese, I could actually navigate the menus and start a race, which is where I had a weird issue I really didn't see coming. For some reason, I could not control my car after starting the race. Pressing buttons wouldn't do anything, and the game wasn't frozen, other cars would still drive and I could pause the game, but I could not accelerate or steer my car. I was actually so bewildered by this that I went and got the demo running on my PC, and it worked just fine, and I was able to control my car without any issue. I'm guessing that RPCS3 Android's input system is still just undercooked, so it causes weird problems like these. I mean, I would have tried it out with my DualSense controller, but, you know, no control support here. So anyways, for the final game I decided to try out something really intensive, a game which I really did not see running on the emulator at all, and that is God of War 3. Well, the demo obviously, and I was left with quite a shock with this game. Firstly, it compiled all of its modules extremely quickly, and once I got in game, it was actually running somewhat smoothly. I could get 15 to 20 FPS, which is actually much more impressive than you think considering how intensive this game is. Okay, so I've done some more testing afterwards and it's not as smooth as I make it out to be in this video. As it turns out, the first area of the game is just really easy to run, and afterwards it's more like 5 to 10 FPS instead of the 15 I was mentioning, so don't get your hopes up way too much for this game. I mean, it's still very exciting that it goes in-game at all, and it's smoother than some other games I've tested, but please, don't think you're going to get a playable experience with this game on a phone. I could actually play and have somewhat enjoyable experience with God of War 3 on my phone, which still blows my mind. Now, remember the issue I was talking about earlier with games not being able to run with right color buffers enabled? Well, for some reason, God of War 3 does not seem to care, as it doesn't crash and runs fine with the setting. Which is good, because without it, the game is almost fully white and unplayable. Would I recommend playing God of War 3 on a phone? Probably not, but this is still an incredible proof of concept, and who knows, maybe in the future we'll actually be able to reach 30 or even 60 FPS in certain games. Okay, so what's the conclusion here? Well, RPCS3 on Android is a project that's still very, and I mean very much work in progress. And creating this video was actually harder than I anticipated, given that documentation and resources regarding it are still scarce and coverage of the emulator, especially on YouTube, is just a mess. Given that Android is, in general, a fairly messy platform for emulation, it's no surprise that you'll find a ton of garbage looking for videos. I've even learned that there is a PS3 emulator right now on the Play Store, which is clearly just repackaged RPCS3 Android under a different name, with the person behind it charging money for it. I won't name it, given that I don't want to give any attention to it, but as a reminder, RPCS3 Android, or RPCSX, is currently not available on the Google Play Store, and shouldn't be downloaded anywhere other than their official respective GitHub pages. Going anywhere else is just risking downloading malware and spyware, and believe me, there is a lot of it in the Android community. Overall, this was a really fun video to make, and was really an interesting experience. However, there is still a lot of work needed to be done here. If you like this video, you can check out my channel, and I will see you all in the next one.